So I kind of understood that Amos, you've been actually been directly involved with the Libertarian Party during the Jo Jorgensen Spike Cohen ticket. I suppose that was that correct. You were involved in it.
Unfortunately.
I see.
Oh no, you don't say it like that, Amos. That's like your
Okay.
meal ticket.
Well, as long as we're on the kind of the same page here, you know,
Oh, there we go.
well, no, it's like what I meant by that was, if you're involved, I don't want you to say anything you're not supposed to or anything like that. But you're kind of saying unfortunately. So let's hear
If
more
I
on that.
said
Come on.
anything I wasn't supposed to, no one has the resources to do anything about it.
Okay. Yeah. Well.
And you don't care.
Okay.
And yeah, and I've not cared as much since.
Yeah. But
But
how was everything? Like, what was your impression of this thing from basically start to finish when you were
I mean,
involved?
I'm still involved in the party,
Mm,
more on the side, but and working for the presidential campaign of the party doesn't really do as much in the party for people as they might think. For some people came into that, essentially like, oh, you work for the campaign. So for some people it meant a lot. For some people it did a lot for them. They kind of gained their footing in the party from that. Some people not so much. Uh, some people probably lost their footing because they were part of that campaign. It's very mixed feelings in the party on that because like there's a variety of reasons, but it was I was doing stuff for libertarians ever since like 2018. So when Brooke and I were doing the podcast, I was trying to make connections with people and was connected with some libertarians and then met some other people who knew. It was just more and more connections until I found out about like there were some websites and Facebook pages, like kind of like your meme pages, but some of them were trying to get into more serious content. And so I was starting to write for some of these like websites, and then got connected with other people who were working in the party in the movement, and then got essentially brought on board to work for the campaign um, right after Jo Jorgensen and Spike Cohen got nominated. So I was working with social media, and I was essentially in charge of Jo Jorgensen's Twitter for a couple months, and
okay.
then kind of got moved on over to work with Spike Cohen's team a lot more, where it was more of a team instead of more compartmentalized, all the way up until the end of the campaign. Um, and then afterwards, continue to work with Spike Cohen all the way up to, well, the present day, essentially. Like
Sure.
now, Spike Cohen is pretty much a friend. I
Yeah.
was literally talking to. I didn't expect this at all. Like he's a busy guy. I call him sometimes. I like 90% of the time he doesn't answer because he's busy, and then we'll set up a time to talk. Well, I called him on his birthday, thinking I'm not going to get a hold of him. I'm probably going to leave a message or I'll text him. He answers, and we talk for like an hour.
Okay.
Like out of all, like he's getting thousands of texts. He's getting all these messages. People are calling him off the hook, and I call and he answers. I'm like, I mean, it's
Pretty
not like
cool.
I'm special or whatever, but just saying. No, but yeah, it's the campaign taught me a lot. It helped me learn a lot of like just kind of where things were going, especially the aftermath of the campaign. Now, a lot of changes right now in the party are essentially being pointed back to like people think the basically people. I mean, libertarians haven't won a presidential campaign ever. So everyone is technically a failure, but they point to this one as like a reason for where things are in the party right now.
I see. Now you mentioned the that you were in charge of George Jorgensen's and then subsequently Spike's Twitter account. Was that is that
Here it
correct?
Uh,
comes.
I was in charge of. I was running her Twitter as like so they had like social media manager,
Mm-hmm.
so I had access and I was like kind of filtering through everything.
Mm-hmm.
Then I moved on over to work with Spike Cohen, who had just a team. So I was just like writing stuff out, and it would get published later on.
Sure. Right. Well, I think Brooks kind of knowing where this is going.
Yeah,
But-
you want to know
Yeah,
about
we do know where it's going.
you want to know about the tweet.
Just so we're on the same page, we are thinking about the anti-racism tweet, right? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
yeah, right?
So in the party, it's known as the tweet heard around the world. Like it is.
Well, one second. Let me just let me preface that very quickly, right?
Okay.
So I am also my membership's just expired, but I was part of the Libertarian Party of the United Kingdom,
Okay.
and so this incident, Amos is not wrong when he says this was the tweet heard around the world. When this tweet was sent, there was a convention, emergency convention called for the UK Libertarian Party. We invited Joe to come speak at our convention, I think in December of that year, and they wanted an explanation. They put out a statement and all of these different things. And ironically, I was just talking with Amos about that tweet. Right. Never mind what and Amos did something to try and hedge it, which not many people know about, and I'm glad he's going to get a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, please.
But as I keep pointing out to him, no, everybody just reads the headline. Nobody saw the aftermath. That tweet is still being talked about to this day. So Amos, take it away, man. You know, save the party, bro.
So, I mean, this is how things were organized. Group chats. There was a group chat for Jo Jorgensen's like Twitter. It was me. It was my immediate like superior who was kind of in charge of communications and social media, and then there was a group of volunteers. I was the only one. Well, me and my immediate like above person were the paid people. I was considered an independent contractor, so I wasn't full on staff. But you know, I was in charge of doing all this, and so I get up, you know, wake up, like middle of the pandemic, we're doing all this stuff. I wake up like 10 o'clock in the morning or something. I look at the group chat, and I see a series of like messages, like you do when you wake up and you're not keeping up. Someone basically posted a screenshot of the tweet, like prior to posting, for proofreading. Hey, I want to post this. It was one of our volunteers.
So, do we have the tweet? Do we have a copy of it or anything? So people may not know.
That'll be good, so I can actually superimpose it when I'm editing the video, at least.
Yeah. So the tweet basically
when you find
is saying it's not enough to not be racist. We must be actively anti-racist. Hashtag BLM or Black Lives Matter. One of those. Right during the protests and the riots happening across the country.
The Summer of Love.
Yeah. So I see the conversation of I want to tweet this to let's be real careful. That sounds like something Angela Davis, a well-known communist, was saying, and then we're like, well, we know we're not quoting that because actually that quote in the tweet, Jo Jorgensen made it in a speech. And in the broader context, and again, this is not me like trying to necessarily defend it, just where her head was when this is going out, where that person who tweeted its head was, not me, was thinking was, oh, Jo said this. She said it during part of her speech she gave at the national convention. So funny enough, the Libertarian Party had a national convention in 2020, which they do it in presidential midterm years. So they just had it this last month in May in Reno, Nevada. This one was in Orlando, Florida in 2020. They had partially a convention on Zoom and another part of the convention in person. So she was already nominated and she comes out to give a speech. And she quotes this from a libertarian, kind of like trying to address this whole, like, libertarians see racism as a sort of perverted form of collectivism. And they kind of, so they're like, well, we should be against that because we're individualists. So we should be essentially saying we're not just not collectivists, let's be actively anti-collectivist, but they just substitute in racism. That's where she's thinking. So, I wake up, I see, we're going to tweet this. be careful, it sounds like we're quoting this communist. Okay, I'm going to tweet it. The next 12 to 24 hours, I'm getting blown up with phone calls, messages. I'm getting tagged on Facebook everywhere I know. Because people knew what I was a part of the campaign, like what's going on, what's here, what's there, like holy crap, how did you not catch this? Amos, did you tweet this? I mean, it was on like Tim Pool's podcast. It was on all the major like Twitter accounts that I knew, all the libertarians, like even among some conservatives. It was just boom, boom, boom going off, and that night I had a phone call with the person who tweeted it, kind of like, then I created, of course, the hedging tweet, the tweet afterwards, to kind of like clear it up, which was brought up too. People were like, oh, someone knows. Well, they didn't say someone. The perception too was Jo tweeted this. She did not. Jo didn't have access to her Twitter during the entire campaign.
Okay. Right.
She would just kind of send things on a pipeline to be tweeted out.
Sure. And that's completely understandable. Now, let me try and act as like the voice of those that saw the tweet and kind of processed it. Now, it's conceivable that Jo Jorgensen probably meant exactly what you said. You said that she may have meant. As a form of anti-collectivism. But I think anyone who responds to this, myself included, probably saw it as kind of like a not understanding where the culture is right now, in which we're accusing everybody of being racist for anywhere from small mistakes to nonsense things like cultural appropriation, that kind of a thing, and and also things like white people can't be racist, that sort of thing. And so it's more like I think people took it as more like a call to being a little bit more narcish, more kind of persecuting, kind of more being more thought policey kind of a deal. Am I right here?
Yeah. I mean, it's the thing that libertarians lack the understanding is I think someone said it this, friend of mine said, we tend to communicate author-centric versus audience-centric. So we're writing for ourselves, not writing for others. So when we communicate, we're thinking of, well, this is what I'm thinking, instead of, this is how everyone else is going to read this.
I see.
And the problem then it's that individualist, call it, your internet autist type thinking of just, well, I'm just talking. Like you, and again, this is, obviously not to disparage any actually autistic people, but you hear about like where certain, autists will get into sort of like these rants about certain things they care about or are passionate about. Sure. And it's very much centered upon what's in their mind, what they're processing, what they're thinking. Libertarians communicate in very much the same way of, well, we're going to talk about things that I care about and things that I'm passionate about, with no regard for how people perceive or read into that, or even if they even care what we're talking about. We have T-shirts, we have slogans that talk about ending the Fed or all these things, and it's
taxation
like,
is theft.
Right. Yeah, and it's like, I made the comment. I said, obviously the everyday person cares about taxes. It's when we add the Asian that they get really weird about it, because everyone's like, what are you talking about? Like, we're using these words, we're communicating in a way that we understand. Like, you're essentially speaking a different language. Like, if Brooke and I got into some really deep talk about, like, theology, for example, in front of, like, some people that maybe have never, don't know us that well, they might be thinking we're speaking, like, a very different language. Sure. We're going to talk about penal substitution theory. We're going to talk about, Athanasius or Trinitarianism. We're going to just, like, it's going to get so crazy. And people are like...
Very esoteric, sort of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Libertarianism comes across that way. So... While, in libertarian circles, and even in libertarian circles, people didn't even understand that too. So really, it was just for, like, her and people who follow her closely.
Yeah,
I didn't even know about the speech until later.
Right.
So I'm seeing this tweet, as most people did, and I'm like, Okay, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
and then the cleanup essentially afterwards of making tweets, kind of going from there. I was like,
You
really
tried.
frustrated.
You tried.
I really did.
Yeah,
Like,
for the record, you see here, guys. He tried. You know.
He did. Yeah, he tried.
No, I really tried to like explain, you know, how this is perceived. For example, 4th of July, again, which is coming up too. On the 4th of July, uh, Biden at the time, you know, candidate Biden was saying, you know, it's patriotic to wear a mask, and this is like early on, so this is July of 2020. We're still very kind of new into, like, there wasn't really mask mandates going like crazy yet. Lockdowns were definitely still happening, but just things were in a certain way. I was basically like, oh, well, here's how you craft a message that appeals to everyone, that kind of ticks certain boxes without compromising libertarian values.
Sure.
And I was like, we're going to tweet this. While it's important to wear a mask, 4th of July is not the day that you should be to force your political agendas. Instead, it's about freedom, patriotism, all this stuff.
Okay.
Kind of like calling out their political messaging. And then, but then someone else said, I don't like that. We're going to tweet, you know, how about you just make your own decisions, kind of like a, you know, middle finger to Biden. And what happened was that was read at, and that's what went out. That was immediately perceived as Jo Jorgensen doesn't believe in masks. Instead of Jo Jorgensen is calling out Joe Biden's messaging.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's actually kind of ironic because one photo I distinctly remember from back in that campaign was Jo Jorgensen and Spike Cohen both wearing masks posing for a photo before something.
Right. And the reason for that is, I mean, Spike
Don't know how
Cohen
much.
has.
Can you say that? I don't know. Is
Oh,
that
no,
public
yeah.
knowledge?
Yeah, people know that.
Oh, okay. That's,
Yeah.
Spike Cohen has MS.
Refresh my memory. What's MS?
Multiple sclerosis.
Multiple sclerosis.
Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
it's an autoimmune disorder. And so he was essentially immunocompromised at that point.
Sure.
And I mean, and what's interesting is he actually, kind of like me, didn't get COVID for all the way until this year. I got COVID Christmas of 20, so like going into the new year.
Yeah.
Of this year, but it was yeah, no, he had that, and that's why he wore a mask. He actually, I think it was even before this was even like, you know, the practice or the people talked about. He would wear like the regular surgical mask and then a cloth, so it was a double mask essentially. You know, people were all about that, but because he understood his needs, what he needed to do, and I see that and go, yeah, that's fine. Like, it was a choice he made because he understood the risks he's taking. He was in the campaign. He was meeting thousands of people.
Yeah.
And of course, Jo, in respect for that, she would wear a mask too.
I see. So that was what that was basically about.
Yeah, it wasn't like, and people, you know, it's a virtue signal. No, it's, she's considerate of him. He's obviously considerate of his own health.
It's funny. Like, if only we were so privy to all these details at all times, right? Like, you know, we
and that's the thing.
Yeah.
Communicate, and when you're communicating these things, you can't expect that everyone's going to know what's happening all the time. You don't have the luxury of like, oh, well, actually what I mean is this, or actually what I mean is that, and really what's happening here is, it's always afterwards that we learn about this.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to listen to you in a moment. Like, if Jo, like, made an entire video explaining the tweet, no one cares.
Sure.
It would be later on that people would. It's kind of like the lady that spilled the coffee and sued McDonald's.
Oh.
If you look into the real story of that, she genuinely had to get a skin graft because
It was so bad.
Yeah, she had to get a skin graft. The coffee literally burned her. It was like a freak thing, but people turned it into some lady burned herself on coffee and got $1 million because fuck McDonald's. It's like no. She legitimately had like hurt herself.
Yeah.
It wasn't about like, I mean, we're such a sue happy culture. Like, she was actually a good case. It wasn't just like, oh, I got a little, you know, Like, it wasn't like a Better Call Saul, like, oh, my health and well-being, my mental well-being was hurt. I need $1 million for that. It's,
She had damages. She had physical scarring
like
and other
nearly
things.
third-degree burns on her legs.
Yeah, it was third degree.
Yeah. Now, so now we're kind of getting into the territory of just going off half-cocked on some small information, right? Now, I can't just help but wonder, that's a great deal of what happened with that whole the George Floyd and everything else that happened because of it. Now, the reason I'm kind of going a little on sensitive mode here is because I was very close to where that happened and where that so where are you, Amos? Where are you located in Minnesota in relative to where that happened?
So you know where Shakopee is?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like about half an hour south of Shakopee. So I'm in a town directly between Shakopee and Mankato.
Okay. Well, do you know where Grand Avenue is?
Kind of.
Okay. Well, we used to live there.
What's wrong with you Minnesotans, man?
Yeah.
You don't know your state.
Right.
No,
Well,
I
wasn't a native,
like,
so
downtown Minneapolis, I'm not super familiar with.
Well, it's like basically 10 minutes on drive to where that was. That's where I used to live, right?
Yep.
And so, I was close to it happening. Like, one day the riots were still going on. I was kind of going off just to get some food somewhere out. And I just see people going in and out in convenience stores, looting them. And like people are hanging off of cars and stuff like that, going kind of nuts. And businesses were all boarded up, And so, that happened because somebody took the idea that a cop killed a black guy and just ran with it, right? But there's more nuance to this, isn't there? There's always, and even with all that, I'm just kind of can't get over this thing, There's no excuse for rioting in my mind, It's what I call vigilante fascism.
What I'll say about the whole... I don't know if we did a show about George Floyd or not. I can't remember if who was still... Yeah, we must have been still going, so we may have touched on it. The politicization that came around that story, which is an American story, right? That has nothing to do with anything really outside. We had protests in the UK. We had protests in London, right? Where our cops are not armed. There's, we don't have the drug issues. Our situation out here is completely different. But like you're saying, these narratives are created and fueled by, political interest, right? Never let an opportunity go to waste. And I think a couple of your senators and others are like bailing out the rioters. There was a lot of political pressure and stuff like that. It was the charge of the election, and it was anti-Trump sentiment, and all of these things playing up the media. Summer of Love. Mostly peaceful protests while the buildings are burning. It's all spin, right? And that spin is still going on now. Very few people take the time to actually, as you say, get into the nuance. They read the headline. If they read the article, that's probably deceptive, and the truth might be at the bottom of the article that they never get to. And a lot of people are still hung up on these narratives. And that was kind of the point of our show as well, was to try to like break down a lot of these issues and kind of expose where the media is lying and deceptive tactics and other things, and try to get to the truth of issues. Wish we had a bigger audience. We might have made an actual difference.
Probably,
but,
yeah.
I mean, I hope. But yeah, even out here in London, there is a mural of George Floyd, basically the new Jesus, and he's kind of sanctified, with his halo and stuff like that. And like, I think the tag is like, "We will not forget," or something along those lines. But as you say, when you look at the nuance of the story and the video, and nobody is saying that the man deserved to die. That his death was tragic. It shouldn't have happened, and it had to be investigated. But the story did not. It's not what people said.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, yeah.
I mean, people want to talk about the drug war because he had to eat all of the drugs he had.
Fentanyl, yeah.
He had to hide what was going on, but literally that's what part of what killed him. I think. Oh, what was it? Was it Pelosi or Harris? One of them. Basically,
Harris was bailing them out.
Well, no, it was the comment was made like George Floyd was essentially more influential than Martin Luther King.
Really?
Yeah, it was some comment like that.
I didn't hear that.
And this is the thing too is I look at like I think it's important to separate sort of like what a symbol does, like what are the changes that take place, versus like who a person really is. Like, you want to go look at, like, for example, Christopher Columbus. Like, there's this whole symbolism, this whole thought process of who he was, what he is, but then you look at like what he actually did, and it's like, not the best guy in history. Granted, I mean, for that time, I don't know, relatively at the time, really bad stuff was happening anyways, but
Yeah, and it could be said on both sides almost.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, colonialism.
We can't impose our morality today on
this is and I've tried to explain to people like this concept of what's called presentism, like looking at the past through the present moral lens, because I'll say, well, how then would you like argue to someone 100 years from now? Let's say, for example, artificial wombs. Let's say artificial womb technology reaches a certain level, and today we don't have that. And how would people in the future, where essentially pro-life is the default stance because we can literally bring fertilized eggs to term through artificial means, and they would look at us as the barbarians that had to resort to abortion or something.
Well, in the spirit of 10K Run podcast, want to talk about recent events, with the whole.
There we go.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like it's that view of looking in the past through the present's moral lens, which is valuable to a certain point. Like people are now, but then this is again, people are now looking at like George Floyd as this sort of sanctified, canonized individual, and someone I was talking to straight up just said, what the protests, what the conversations led to is important, but who is behind, the person where that started from, George Floyd. Not the.
I mean, have any? What conversations? I don't know too many conversations that have come out of that. Do you know any?
I mean, with people. I mean, granted, it's part of the long line of like looking more into like police. If you really do some digging, you'll find out about shitty stuff police are doing all across the country. It brings into the conversation, are we really, it brings conversations on both sides. Are we talking about this more because he's a black man? Are we talking about more because it's a cop? Are we talking about police violence as a larger issue? Is racism the issue? It gets people to be digging more. Like, for example, like Roe v. Wade being overturned, some people consider it a good thing, some people consider it a bad thing. But one thing that I think is both good and bad is people are at least paying attention that we have a Supreme Court.
Right, yeah. Well, to backtrack a bit on what kind of conversations are coming out of the whole George Floyd thing. Well, I don't know. One lingering hypocrisy that's standing out in my mind is that they always this slogan, Black Lives Matter. Like as if up to this point, Black lives, nobody cared about them. But the problem is, when something similar like this happens to a white guy or something like that, there's, relatively speaking, media silence. And there's, not that I want riots. I'm against riots, but there have been no riots over it. Duncan Lemp is one thing I can think of. There's this another guy whose name I can't think off the top of my head, but I think he had some mental problem, but he was basically mistreated and was killed by police, but nobody cares about that one. And so, in fact, I think Black Lives Matter is an incredibly dishonest slogan. It's almost like we care, they matter when it's black.
And even with that, I think there's a nuance, because there was a story out of the riots of a black ex-police officer who was called out to protect a store for one of his friends, and they killed him. He died. I can't remember his name is Doyle, I think. This has been a while since.
Yeah.
Where's the outrage about that? So there is, as you say, there's nuance, and the whole woke ideology, the Black Lives Matter thing, and especially the information is coming out now about how that money was spent. The donations to the BLM, a lot of it went to the Democratic Party. The founder apparently has a couple mansions in her real estate portfolio now, and she's like hooked up her family and stuff like that. So I think the people, again, most people are just looking at the headline and they're thinking, oh, this is about people.
Yeah.
Not realizing, no, BLM is a political action organization with an agenda. And that's where, you need a little nuance to look into that and know the difference.
Looking into what happened afterwards too, like there are people that genuinely care about keeping police accountable. Like, so part of working with Spike Cohen even after the campaign was we would actually look into police brutality articles. We would just find like tons of them, and it wasn't to any specific race. It was just people in general. But you'd want to really like push for the ones like where people who are vulnerable individuals, regardless of race. Like we would find like some old lady who was dealing with dementia that got like her arm broken by a cop, or a guy who was autistic or somehow mentally challenged, didn't realize that he forgot to pay for something, but because of policy or whatever, someone like decided to call the police. The police then like, it's bad timing, bad town. Now, but then this is the thing: it's limited to local news, maybe even statewide news, but it never makes national news.
And what about that?
Bring that to light.
So sorry, I interrupted you.
But it's sorry, Brooke had a point on something.
Okay.
Repeat what you were kind of saying, Brooke, just before I jumped in.
What was I saying just now about? Well, it's the nuance, right? So the Black Lives Matter, the slogan is an organization. That's like a political action group.
Right.
Right. So yeah, individuals, and especially as libertarians, we value the individual, and this was Martin Luther's speech. The color of your skin should not matter. It's the content of your character. Correct. That in itself, of course, and it's a very difficult argument to push that the United States is a racial country, considering that yes, you elected Barack Obama twice. Yes, he's biracial, but most people would account of him as a black individual. So there's a disconnect, and you have to wonder why. Who's benefiting from having that disconnect? So a very good question is like, are race relations better now after Barack Obama, or were they better before Barack Obama? And what's the difference, and what changed it? And
some would say then, like, is the information age the reason we, like, looking at the proclivities of just how media likes to, like, if media is really good at spinning and making things, does it mean there's more happening, or is more that we're aware of? That's the thing.
Right.
Like I told you about police brutality. It's always been happening.
Correct.
It's only until recently that we've started talking about it more, because it's easier to keep track of, find out about, because you just type in police brutality, you're going to find articles of like, maybe one from the last week in, some state that you never heard about it happening.
Palmersville, Idaho.
Something.